Ross Jackson, LouisianaSports.net, our Saints beat reporter, certainly hosts of the Locked On Saints podcast as well, sits down with me. Ross, how we doing?
I'm doing great, man. Glad to be here with you. Always fun to see the hustle and bustle here on Radio
Yeah,
Row.
it's the Super Bowl's coming to your city. How you feel about that?
Oh, man, I love it. I think New Orleans should host all events. I don't care what the event is. Bring the Olympics here. There's no space. We'll figure it out. It's fine. We'll put things on top of things. It'll be all right.
There's a take. Colin Cowherd has a great take on like the Olympics and some things. It's like we don't need to give everybody their opportunity. There are like 5 cities that need to host the Olympics, and we just go back to those all the time. And there are like 3 places that need to host the Super Bowl, and this is certainly one of them, and it's going to be an awesome deal. I'm pumped that the weather's going to be warm, and it's going to be an awesome week here.
And no more snow.
In the South. Yeah, no, jeez. Think about it, that would have happened. That would have been the worst ever.
Yeah.
But no such misfortune. It's going to be awesome. Obviously, the news of the day, I opened the show with it today. Adam Schefter goes on the Pat McAfee show, says, hey, barring any last-second glitches, that Kellen Moore is going to be the guy. You had been saying for a week now that if this was going to happen, that would likely be how it was reported because they can't come to anything final until after the Super Bowl. But I would imagine no big surprise today.
Yeah, no big surprise at all. This is kind of what we've been looking at here, especially after we saw Mike McCarthy withdraw from the conversation. That was a big moment for this coaching search because it happened right after they did the in-person interview when they flew out to Philly to meet with Kellen Moore. Then all of a sudden Mike McCarthy's like, I'm good. Like, I don't wanna. Because he runs the chance of potentially going up against and losing to his former assistant when it comes to the gig. Not a great look for him as he looks to go into the 2026 coaching cycle. So this is so far kind of going exactly the way that we thought that this would go post-Super Bowl. Very likely that third meeting between the team and Kellen Moore is not going to be any kind of conversation about are you interested? It's going to be more so like, all right, so how do we get the figures figured out?
Correct. So my take on this has been I don't really care about the process. Like, I know the optics weren't great, but I've seen plenty of gorgeous coaching searches yield a bad result. I've seen plenty of mangled ones yield a reasonable result. So, like, I don't really care about that part. I just care about the result. The result is Kellen Moore. How do you feel about the way this carried out over the last 3 weeks and then ultimately how it arrived at the final spot?
Yeah, it was certainly a roller coaster, to say the least, for New Orleans, right? You get these guys that are kind of the favorites, and then you get certain people that are pulling out and kind of withdrawing and things like that. And so the optics were kind of up and down all throughout. There's no doubt about that. But I think when you end up landing on a 30-something-year-old offensive-minded guy that is considered a genius at his craft and that has the ability and experience, having coached with Dallas, having coached with Los Angeles, the Chargers, and having coached in Philly, to bring in and assemble a staff that could support around him, I think that's a pretty good place to land. My biggest question mark around Kellen Moore was simple. Does he have kind of the umph, the gusto, the fire, the ferocity to be a head coach? But he's just got to find another way to kind of capture the hearts and souls of the other players that are around him in that locker room. Winning's a good way to start, but you can also build that staff to kind of help you out there. So as long as he can answer that question, I think everything in terms of what you're looking for to potentially work out tools-wise for a head coach, he's got.
It appears, I did a quick search, I think he's the youngest coach in the NFL when he takes the job. I've got a bunch of guys listed out right here that were younger than him when they took jobs, but that's their current age there. So, yeah, he's 36, and that is young. Yeah. It doesn't make him an outlier when you start to look at some of the other names on that list. There's a bunch of coaches in the NFL that are between 36 and 41 years old.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes me wonder, sitting here at nearly 35 years old, what am I doing? What am I doing? Why don't I have a head coaching job?
You're on Radio Row.
Yeah,
How does it get any better than that?
It's not bad. Yeah, but like you look at this list, right? Ben Johnson, Zach Taylor, D'Amico Ryans. We'll see what happens with Liam Cohen, but like Sean McVay. And Sean McVay took over when he was what? 30 years old, right? So like we've seen this as the trend to go and get the young, unproven guy and give them an opportunity to prove themselves, unproven as a head coach, right? Proven elsewhere, but unproven guys, as opposed to going out and finding the guys that have been there, done that. And like if you want a better comparison of that or a better sort of, I guess, illustration of that, Kellen Moore, Mike McCarthy, and look where the New Orleans Saints are headed.
I liked Kellen Moore's offensive track record. He had a season when he was the Cowboys offensive coordinator. They led the NFL in touchdowns. I think this year with a team that looks different than Dallas with Philadelphia, they've leaned heavier on the run game and have been really good at scoring points. And you've had 3 different organizations that have trusted him to run their offense to this point, which I think says a lot about him at a young age. What do you like about a Kellen Moore offense that you've observed?
Yeah, I like the chameleon-like nature of it, right? He does a really good job of blending his offense to the talents of the players that are on the roster. We've seen that not work or not happen here in New Orleans. You go back to the Pete Carmichael days, it just felt like talent wasn't being maximized. And in this sort of scheme or system that we've seen from Kellen Moore, he's done a really good job of doing that, right? When he had Dak Prescott and he had him playing at an MVP level up until the injury, they were leading the league in passing for that time. Then you go to Philly, or rather you go to Los Angeles, things are a little shaky there, but things were really shaky under Brandon Staley as a whole, right? A lot of those issues there were like in-game clock management, game management type things, but got Austin Eckler going in the passing game again, was able to finally get Keenan Allen working as a #1 wide receiver, getting Justin Herbert to get the ball out of his hands quickly and kind of command the offense a little bit more, see the field a different way. Kellen Moore, as a former quarterback, has the ability to kind of translate all that. Then you go over to Philly, and you're like, hey, here's Saquon Barkley. And he's like, great, let's run him a lot because he's really good. And then you get a 2,000-yard rushing season out of Saquon Barkley, MVP-level play, if MVP wasn't a quarterback award. And now he's coaching in a Super Bowl, right? And so I think that's the thing that you really like is you see a guy here who can at least bring an offense that maximizes the talent that's on that roster.
Do you think he's going to bring a defensive coordinator that's potentially got head coaching experience? I mean, does he need to have somebody on his staff that's been in that chair before, or is that just me kind of projecting?
No, I think there's value there, right? To have somebody around that's kind of been there, done that, but that isn't going to be you don't want to bring somebody that's going to be a threat to you. You know what I mean? Like that's a real concern. I don't know if he's really concerned about it. I know I would be if I'm a first-time head coach. But so I think that there's that piece. But then the other part of it too is you're going to want a defense that you know works. You don't want to get a first-time head coach running your offense and then a first-time defensive coordinator calling your defense. Go and get something that has been proven that you've seen somewhere. I'd be asking Vic Fangio, are you married to the Philadelphia Eagles or are you married to complementing an offense that complements your defense? I'd be calling up Brandon Staley being like, listen, bro, I know you hired me, but I'm finna hire you. You know what I mean? Because when Brandon Staley was with the Los Angeles Rams, that was a fantastic defense on a team that was known for its offense. And so can you get Brandon Staley to come and do what it is that he does well? He's assistant head coach is the position he's holding right now with the Niners. And so get him over and have him do what it is that he does well as a defensive coordinator. Not a good head coach doesn't mean you're not a good DC. And then be able to kind of find a guy there that's had a little bit of that experience and might be able to say, hey, avoid this, do this, try this, all those other things, kind of have that confidant.
I know that you wrote at LouisianaSports.net last week about the potential snag with Derek Carr being in place last week, and then maybe that's been ironed out. What do you make of Kellen Moore, Derek Carr, and what the future may hold there?
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's funny. First of all, those two played against one another in college.
Yeah, they did.
Boise State, I've learned, not Boise,
right.
Boise, and Fresno State. Really cool stuff there. But look, my understanding is that a lot of that sort of chatter was people speculating why Kellen Moore might not take the job more than it really was Kellen Moore saying, I don't know if I want that job. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, if he didn't, well, this is why that would make sense. And really the reason comes down to you don't have a future with Derek Carr, right? Not a long-term future. He's going into a age 34 season. I say as I'm going to my age 35 season. As
You've got a longer future in the game than he does.
But, right, like, so there's just a lot more that's being asked of him, right? And so, like, there's not a long-term situation there. You've got two young guys that have shown some promise within their coaching staffs and things like that, but you don't have that quarterback on a rookie contract with multiple years of starting experience. So you don't have a future at the position. Here's the thing. That might be true, but for Kellen Moore, that means he gets to build the future at that position. And he, as a former quarterback, I'm sure, understands the value of that.
No doubt. So the question now becomes, this is a new era for the Saints. And you could argue that the Dennis Allen era was a little bit of a continuation, especially with Pete Carmichael in place, and they just tried to keep the band together. That didn't work. This is the first time that you've actually got a little bit of overturn here. How different do you expect things to be this offseason and moving forward? Do you still think, hey, it's still Mickey Loomis, it's still Dennis Lauscha, it's still Kai Harley, it's still all those guys that have been there? They're just bringing in their next little piece.
No, I think there's going to be a lot different. And some of it will be whether they like it or not in a way, right? Because your quarterback coach, your offensive coordinator, your offensive line coach, and your running backs coach are all either leaving or potentially leaving. You have over on the defensive side a need for a defensive coordinator because you fired Dennis Allen. And so when you let go of Dennis Allen, you lost your head coach and your architect of your defense. And then you have a linebackers coach that's already left. So I think you're going to see a lot of turnover on the coaching staff. What happens with the roster is going to depend upon how they approach the salary cap And so maybe not as much roster turnover right away, but then you're going to see that the next year. And so really what you're looking at is kind of a couple of seasons of change upcoming to kind of flip things and build everything in the vision of that new head coach, which I think is the right way for the organization to go from here.
Do you think the Super Bowl just got more interesting for the Saints fans that are watching because their new head coach is going to be calling plays in the Super Bowl?
I'll tell you what, it's a lot nicer for a fan to be able to say that the head coach that their favorite team just hired is a Super Bowl champion than it is to say that they're not a Super Bowl champion, right? You could say that they got to the Super Bowl, but either you're saying they won or you're saying they didn't. So I do think that this Super Bowl, all of a sudden, which is being played in their very backyard, becomes very, very important, or not very important, but becomes very entertaining, very interesting, very intriguing for Saints fans that want to know, hey, does the new head coach that's about to take over my favorite football team, do they have a ring on their finger because of what they were able to do the season before they were hired? I think it's a good situation for Saints fans.
What does your work week look like as far as what you're going to be bringing us for .net and as well as Locked On Saints? I'm sure it's going to be pretty busy.
I was about to say the answer is yes. What does my work week look like? Yeah. No, I mean, it's a lot. I mean, obviously, like, multiple major stories around the New Orleans Saints today that we're covering over on the site, not straying away from any of that, and then looking at, current head coach, or excuse me, current coaching staff exits and things like that we've already seen, and then looking ahead to the draft as well and free agency in between. So there's just so much, because the next thing you're looking at when you hire Kellen Moore, or when Kellen Moore, if Kellen Moore is hired, however you want to say it, is how does he build out the rest of his coaching staff? And then how does that impact the roster? So we'll be breaking all of that down over at LouisianaSports.net and on Locked On Saints.
I'll let you get right back to it right now. Appreciate it,
Right
Ross.
at it, man. Thank you.
He's Ross Jackson, LouisianaSports.net Saints beat writer, also Locked On Saints. Going to be busy week this week for him, and then next week we imagine there will be a press conference, and they'll push off the dock with the Kellen Moore era coming up very quickly.
Hey, it's Hunt. Thanks for watching Hunt on Saints. Before you leave, help us out a little bit. Hit that like button, leave your comments in the section below, and hit that subscribe button so you get all our content right here from Hunt on Saints. We'll see you next time.